it's Athena. So right after A-levels ended, I started my own little speaking initiative, some little program, because I knew that what I had was material. And that material was useless unless I knew how to kind of shape them into solutions to some key issues, some topic areas that people actually had issues with. So I started this speaking program in order to empower other people who wanted to, learn how to pitch, learn how to speak on a stage, or even just have a smoother conversation with someone else. So that's why I created that sort of program, and we'll call this a restaurant because these are my top 3 takeaways from that entire experience, that entire journey. I really learned a lot as well as someone who's been in the public speaking sort of, not really circuit. I just like to speak in public, and I joined some competitions to really interact more with other public speakers and up my skills. And you know what? I do see why these are the 3 areas that people might want to work on, because it really does make it easier to just give a speech, think of a speech, make a speech, or even have a better conversation with someone else. Yep, so these are my 3 takeaways/tips. So my very first tip is to inspire yourself before you inspire others. Now the thing is, I always say put others before yourself. But the thing is, with public speaking, it's something that involves you on a public platform, and you kind of need to focus on refining your message, focusing on what you want to say before you march up to someone else and say that you want to help them convey their message. You know what I mean? So I think a really good example of this in history is Martin Luther King Jr. So he gave that really famous I Had a Dream speech, but the other thing that he gave people was his belief in himself. And the reason is because of this. He was able to inspire other people before others in the way that he indexed his identity as a black man in America, which had very racist sort of leadership and laws and administration running through the country back then. He indexed his own identity as being part of someone from a vulnerable group, but also showed that at the same time he could be someone standing up on stage addressing other people about the future of his own community and his own group facing that sort of racial discrimination. So in that way, he not only inspired himself, but he highlighted how his voice could inspire future change and future impact. And it is that story and that delivery and that presentation that really helped him narrow down on the specific message and values that he stood for, making his speech something that people would sit up and listen to if they wanted to be inspired by someone who went against an overwhelmingly racist narrative. So that's the first tip that I really just have for you, which is to just really have that belief in yourself, that hope in yourself, and inspire yourself before inspiring other people. And in order to inspire yourself, there are a few things that you can do. The first thing is to always look inwards and think of certain achievements that you've gotten, or certain milestones, things that you consider milestones at least, and really just put it into perspective. When in your life did you achieve this, or why do you consider this a milestone? And really understand why then you identify that as a win in your life. When you do that, then you're able to see where your values lie, and also what kind of challenges you faced. What things did you consider challenges that you overcame? Why did you consider this new thing, this event, this occurrence in your life a win? And in doing that, what you actually do is help yourself out in another area of public speaking. So I've gone to a few rounds of public speaking where you don't go out with a speech. It's really impromptu, and I know that that can be hell for some people. It's like going up into the battlefield with no armor, nothing. You're just walking up there. So one thing that happens when you're in tune with your experiences and the type of person you are is that you have identified certain pockets of personal and real life anecdotes that you can bring out anytime on stage. You can have them like a menu in your head to serve as that appetizer, before you go on to the meat of your speech, which may involve something else, but you've already started from that point of intimacy, of sharing a story that happened in your life with the audience, and that really will help people really relate more to you, or be able to access the content of your speech from then onwards. So my second tip is to always know what language you should be speaking. Don't get me wrong, what I mean is not like I should be speaking English because this is an English competition, or I should be speaking Mandarin or Spanish because this is a language-specific, culture-specific competition. It's not about that. What I mean is choosing the right variety or the right vernacular to sort of speak in. So I'm just going to use an example from my own country, Singapore, and this may touch on an age-old debate, but it really isn't about that. I'll show you why. So basically in Singapore, we have this thing called Singlish, which is actually called its official name is Singapore Colloquial English, so SCE for short. And SCE is often contrasted to SSE, which is Singapore Standard English, which is basically English that is free of certain discourse particles like la, lor, meh, things that you would kind of hear of when you speak to someone who is speaking in Singlish to you. So the reason why people don't want to speak in Singlish sometimes is because they find that it's more informal or that it becomes incomprehensible to someone else. Why? Because when, for example, someone from overseas comes, they may not understand certain borrowings. So, for example, words that are borrowed from ethnic groups specific to Singapore. So maybe like yasu is not something that my American aunt would understand or would be able to comprehend. Now, what I'm not trying to say is to delete one entire English from your vocabulary, but you need to know that there are times to use this and this. So, for example, I participated in a public speaking competition where I knew that the hosts and the judges, the panel, the audience, they were all Singaporean. And because of that, I actually used SCE, which I'm not very confident in because I grew up in America and my use of Singlish tends to be kind of awkward and really stilted. But I managed to use that, so I weaved in things like don't be so kiasu lah and stuff like that. And when I brought these kind of elements into the speech, it allowed me to connect with them on a more personal level. That it indexed my identity as, yo, I'm a fellow Singaporean. Vote for me. That kind of thing. But not really, don't vote for me. Just give me the win, give me the prize money. But okay, so yeah. So that's just one example. Another example that I have for you is an example that happened last year. So I was at Glow Festival with Team Carpe and I was going to interview a yoga expert and instructor from overseas. So she comes from America. And because she comes from America, there was a very low chance that she would understand Singlish, that she would understand Singlish slang, basically. And because of that, when I interviewed her, I tapped more on using Singapore Standard English instead. So I didn't include any sort of insertions from Singlish at all. Instead, what I used was field-specific lexes. So things like sun salutation, downward dog, asana, which are all examples of areas, movements, or activity that yogis would know, and therefore it would be a way for me to relate to her instead. So that actually brings me really nicely into my last point, which is limit what that mouth can do. Meaning that I have full faith and belief that everyone has areas that they're interested in, things that they're an expert in, and stuff that they're more passionate about talking about. And that makes it easier, for example, for you as a person who's interested in maybe public speaking. It's easier for you to pick up certain jargon from this area and that area. But what we need to be aware of is that there's always going to be another person involved, whether it be an audience or a single judge or an interviewer or just someone else sitting across from you in a conversation. There's always going to be someone else that is different because of the way that they were brought up or because of the areas that they're interested in, their cultural background, their heritage. So there are things that we cannot expect someone else to recognize and understand immediately, even if we're talking English. So there is a thing called a lexical cline, and what it does is sort of categorizes the level of language that you use even when you're talking the same language, when you're speaking in the same language. So for example, if I'm talking about the area of computing and sort of coding. So my brother is an expert in that. So when I'm talking to him, I would opt to maybe use the highest level of complexity. So maybe technical lexis, and I would talk about APIs, ALQ, pandas, or I could also go one step lower and look at the complex lexis level, which would maybe talk about data mining, machine learning. But if I'm talking to my friend who's more into teaching and arts education, and she doesn't really have prior knowledge of computing or coding, then maybe instead of like data mining and stuff like that, I would just tell her, oh, did you know about data science? And these are a few concepts underneath. So when someone tells you, for example, in like those memes, speak human to me, like it's actually just a way of saying that you need to have a good grasp of that entire lexical cline and understand what type of language to use and when. So for example, in a real life sort of public speaking setting, right? Let's say you need to give a speech on the environment. So that was what I did last year. I knew that in the audience, there weren't only environmental activists, but there were also people who would be voting who were the everyday public. They were the everyday man, there were laymen, laywoman, laid on me. Okay, basically, they were people who wouldn't know certain environmental concepts. There are people who wouldn't be super in touch with maybe ecological processes or the Latin names of rare trees and things like that. So what you need to know is that when you're given a speech, assignment or, just a sort of task to do which involves speaking. It's not enough to just identify the register and know who else is talking, but know who you're talking to. And in that way, pretend that you're having a conversation with each specific group, and in that way, you can structure your speech. So I'll go back to the example of the lexical climb. Maybe the first group of people that I'm talking to in the audience are environmental activists. So I can afford to use technical and complex lexis and really describe scenarios that are very specific to environmental maintenance and care, and use scientific terms that they would immediately understand and get. But at the same time, don't you think that wrangling my own arts-educated mind around those environmental terms, don't you think that would be a bit difficult to remember and even execute it? There would be a larger phonological burden. So what you can always do is this trick where you vary the language or lexis cline that you choose to hold on to. So maybe at the start of my speech, I really want to hook everyone in. I don't just want to talk and address to that specific expert group of environmentalists, because I know that the people that I need to get the vote from are also laymen. So I'll use everyday lexis instead, like, everyday sort of campaign slogans like save the trees, or repeat to them something that they've already known in everyday lexis, such as reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycle is something that people know of, but whether they know the scientific processes behind it, I'll leave that to the meat of my speech later on. Once I've addressed them by talking at a level at which people who aren't experts in that field can understand, then I can slowly move on to using technical and complex lexis to really highlight that I've researched for this speech and that I'm someone that is keen on solving environmental issues. I'm taking this shit seriously. I am not going to just recycle. I'm going to go beyond that. Okay, virtuous cycle. Yeah, but that may bring another problem, because what I mentioned before was that if you use everyday lexis, it's likely easier for you to understand and remember the speech yourself if you're not a subject expert in that topic. So what you can do is signpost when you're going to change. The first benefit of signposting is that it informs the audience that, okay, I'm going to move on to this other part of the speech now. It's going to involve more technical terms. This is going to be the part where I delve into my research findings and things like that. You have already told them that you're doing that. But not only that, it enables you to cue yourself to get into that frame of mind where you need to start speaking like an expert in that field. So that transition can be helped using words in your own speech, using language that's coming out of your mouth. You're going to actually signal your internal collective one brain cell to start splitting up and mitosing into two different sisters. One sister knows a lot about tech, one sister knows nothing about tech, but it's okay because we are one sibling clan, that kind of thing. So what I'm trying to say is that, just be really aware of what type of language you're using, and this actually can function as a planning tool. So maybe when you want to write the speech, so not even the stage in which you go on stage, pun, yet, it's more about the crafting of the speech. Because you already know that you have to address, the technical side and then the everyday side and then the more complex side, then you know how to structure your speech and also what areas of research are appropriate for saying at this time and what areas are like maybe a relatable scenario is easier to say at the beginning because it's an anecdote that everyone can access and relate to. So these are my top 3 public speaking tips that I have tried and tested with a wide range of people, and yeah, it really just helped me empower them in a better way. The solutions that I provided via speaking through a linguistics lens was able to encourage them to believe in themselves first and foremost, that they could actually speak and that they could speak well, and that they didn't need to let the past sort of person who was more nervous of speaking for them really affect them, because it is about your language control and awareness now. Just remember that you are someone who has something to offer. You have a story that is standing with you. You are not alone, because you are you and your stories. You are you and your life experiences. You are you and all the opportunities that you have been granted and blessed with. So thank you so much for listening to me, and yeah, just subscribe for more public speaking / interview tips.